Hey guys, tonight, we are embarking on a truly remarkable and for its time rather audacious journey. Picture yourself in the late 4th century Roman Empire, a world of sprawling cities, dusty roads, and a fervent, relatively new Christian faith sweeping across its vast territories. You are a woman of noble standing, devout, and filled with an insatiable curiosity, about to undertake an adventure that would make even seasoned legionaries pause. We're following the curious story of Egeria, a Roman lady whose strangely unconventional, almost forbidden journey to the east will leave an indelible mark on history. Now imagine undertaking a multi-year solo voyage across deserts, mountains, and politically fractious regions, armed mostly with unshakable faith and probably some incredibly durable sandals. Let's just say your travel insurance options would be distinctly limited, and your chances of becoming an unsung hero in a local bandit's unpublished and likely very short memoirs surprisingly high. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, I'd love to know where you're drifting off from tonight and what time it is. Drop it in the comments. It's always a quiet thrill to see how far our sleepy little histories reach. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are Egeria, or perhaps Etheria. Your precise name, like so many details about your early life, remains tantalizingly shrouded in the mists of time. A quirky or fringe tidbit for you right at the start, the very manuscript that details your incredible journey. A long letter written to your beloved sisters back home was lost to the world for over 1,000 years. It was only rediscovered in 1884 in a library in Arezzo, Italy. And even then its beginning and end were missing, so we don't even have your name from your own hand in the surviving text. It was scholarly detective work comparing it to an earlier 7th century reference by a monk named Valerius who praised a pilgrim named Etheria or Egeria that gave you back your identity. It is the late 300s AD, specifically around the year 381. The Roman Empire, though, vast, is showing signs of the internal pressures and external threats that will eventually reshape it. Yet it is also an empire officially and increasingly fervently Christian. Constantine the Great converted a lifetime ago, and Theodosius I about to make Nicene Christianity the state religion. This new religious landscape has opened up new avenues for devotion, and one of the most potent is pilgrimage. The sacred journey to places sanctified by biblical events or the lives of saints. You, Egeria, are a woman of this era. Historians and classicists continue to debate Egeria's precise social standing and even her exact place of origin. Whether Galatia in northwestern Hispania, modern Galicia, Spain, Aquitaine in Gaul, or elsewhere in the Western Roman Empire, as the surviving portion of her text offers limited, direct personal details. However, your literacy, your apparent access to resources and letters of introduction, and the confident tone of your writing strongly suggest you are a woman of considerable means, noble birth, and a good education. Certainly far more than was typical for most women of your time. You are deeply, passionately devout. Your faith is not a passive, inherited custom. It's a burning fire within you, a yearning to connect directly with the very roots of your Christian belief. And so a plan begins to form in your mind, a vow, an audacious and unconventional resolve. You will undertake a pilgrimage. Not just a short trip to a local martyr's shrine or a revered bishop's tomb, but an epic multi-year odyssey to the very heartlands of Christianity. To Jerusalem, to the holy sites of Palestine, to Egypt, and the Sinai desert where Moses received the 10 Commandments, and even further east into Mesopotamia. Your packing list for what will turn out to be an approximately 3-year pilgrimage across thousands of miles of challenging terrain. Probably some very sturdy sandals, a spare tunic or two. Modesty and practicality being key. A copy of the scriptures if you could obtain one, and an absolutely industrial-sized container of unshakable faith. Maybe a small, very dry biscuit that you hope will last until you reach Constantinople. Now, in the late 4th century, pilgrimage was certainly a growing phenomenon. A mainstream historical fact is that Egeria was a Christian woman who undertook this extensive pilgrimage to the eastern Mediterranean between approximately 381 and 384 AD. And her detailed account is one of the earliest, most detailed, and most valuable surviving travelogues written by any Christian pilgrim, male or female. Men, particularly clergy or monks, undertook such journeys. But for a woman, especially one traveling with the degree of independence you seem to possess, it was highly unusual. Roman society, even Christianized Roman society, still had fairly defined roles for women. Noble women were expected to manage households, raise families, engage in pious works locally, perhaps even become influential abbesses if they chose a monastic life. They were not generally expected to embark on solo adventures across the known world, facing bandits' deserts, wild animals, political unrest, and the sheer logistical nightmare of ancient long-distance travel. This is where the strangely forbidden nuance of your journey comes into play. It wasn't that there was a specific imperial edict saying, "Ladies, thou shalt not go on extremely long religious sightseeing tours." But the societal norms, the concerns for a woman's safety, her reputation, and the perceived proprieties of her station would have made your decision a subject of considerable comment, and likely considerable consternation among your peers and family. When you announce your travel plans to your circle of devout sisters, the women to whom your letter is addressed, who may have been members of a religious community or simply close friends, there's probably a stunned silence. This is followed by one of them politely, but with a distinct tremor in her voice, inquiring if you've perhaps been spending a bit too much time out in the Galatian sun without a fashionable, wide-brimmed Roman pedicis to protect your sensible head. They would worry, and with good reason. The roads, while often well-maintained Roman constructions, passed through remote areas. There were bureaucratic hurdles, different languages and customs to navigate once you left the Latin-speaking West for the Greek-speaking East and beyond. What about chaperones? What about protection? Your letter suggests you sometimes traveled with companions, including other clergy or monks, and certainly utilized the growing network of Christian hospitality, monasteries, bishoprics, and pilgrim hostels. But the driving force, the initiative, the sheer will to undertake and complete this extraordinary itinerary seems to be all yours. You are not a passive participant being led. You are an active explorer, a keen observer, a woman with a mission. Your motivation is purely spiritual. You are not a tourist in the modern sense seeking exotic sights or leisurely diversions. You are driven by what you call your affectio, your deep longing to see the places where the events of the Old and New Testaments unfolded, to pray where Jesus and the prophets prayed to meet the holy men and women, the ascetics and monks whose devotion was legendary. You want to touch the sacred, to breathe its air, to deepen your faith through direct experience. So you make your preparation. This would involve more than just packing a bag. You would need letters of introduction from influential bishops in your home province, letters that would open doors to churches, monasteries, and the homes of fellow Christians across the empire. You would need to secure funds for the journey. Travel was expensive even if you relied on hospitality. You would need to consider companions' routes and the daunting logistics of it all. But overriding all these practical concerns is your unwavering vow, your great departure. The eyebrows are raised. The concerns are voiced. But your resolve, Egeria, is set. The East is calling, and you, a most curious and determined Roman lady, are about to answer. The decision is made, your unconventional vow, firmly set in your heart, Egeria. The goodbyes to your beloved sisters, your spiritual companions back in your distant western home, be it Galicia in Hispania or somewhere in Gaul, are undoubtedly tinged with sadness, perhaps a few shared tears, and certainly a great many prayers for your safety and success. They likely view your departure with a mixture of awe at your devotion and profound anxiety for the immense journey you are undertaking. You can almost hear their whispered concerns. All that way for so long, may the angels guard her every step. But your resolve, fueled by that deep affectio, that spiritual longing, is unshakable. The East with its sacred mysteries beckons, and so you turn your face towards the rising sun, and your great adventure begins. The exact route Egeria took through Western Europe towards Constantinople is not detailed in the surviving part of her manuscript, as the beginning of your letter is lost to us. Scholars therefore have to reconstruct plausible itineraries based on common Roman roads and known pilgrim routes of the period, imagining the path you might have trod. But whichever specific roads you take, one thing is certain: you are relying on the vast, impressive, and remarkably enduring network of Roman engineering. A mainstream historical fact is that the Roman road system, the Viae Romanae, was a true marvel, stretching for tens of thousands of miles across the empire. These paved highways, built primarily for military legionary movement, and imperial administration also facilitated trade communication and increasingly the journeys of pilgrims like yourself. They are the arteries of the empire, and you are now a tiny corpuscle flowing along them eastward bound. Your journey likely starts with some form of wheeled transport. Perhaps you are able to utilize the cursus publicus, the state-run post system, if your social standing and letters of introduction grant you access to its relay stations and carriages. This would be the most efficient, if somewhat impersonal way to cover long distances. More likely for at least parts of the journey, you might hire a sturdy cart or wagon, perhaps drawn by mules or oxen, or join a group of fellow travelers for safety and companionship. You might even find yourself riding a donkey, or for some stretches simply walking your sturdy sandals, kicking up the dust of imperial highways. This is no luxury cruise, about. It's a slow, often uncomfortable trundle across a continent. These Roman roads are impressively straight mostly, except for the bits where they clearly had a spirited argument with a particularly stubborn mountain range and decided to just go around it or occasionally straight over it with a gradient that makes your poor, long-suffering mule consider filing a formal complaint with the local animal welfare deity if such a thing existed. The landscape of the Western Roman Empire slowly unspools before you. You pass through cultivated farmlands, vast estates, or villa rusticae with their fields of grain and vineyards, evidence of Rome's agricultural heartland. You traverse dark ancient forests where the road cuts a swath through the wilderness, and where you might feel a prickle of apprehension remembering tales of bandits or wild beasts. You cross wide, slow-flowing rivers on sturdy Roman bridges of stone marvels of engineering in themselves, or perhaps on creaking wooden ferries. Towns and cities, each with its own forum basilica, and perhaps a Christian church or two, offer brief respite places to resupply, gather news, and connect with local Christian communities. You might see other travelers on the road, merchants with their laden pack animals, stern-faced legionaries marching to or from some distant frontier, garrison imperial messengers hurrying with official dispatches, and perhaps even other pilgrims, their faces also set towards the east. A quirky or fringe tidbit you'd notice along these major routes are the Roman milestones. These aren't just simple distance markers. Many of them are inscribed with the name of the emperor who commissioned or repaired that particular stretch of road, along with his titles and the distance to the next major town. They are constant, subtle reminders of imperial power and presence, a form of ancient Roman propaganda carved in stone, ensuring you never forget whose vast domain you are traversing. Another 10 miles, sponsored by Emperor Theodosius. You might muse as you trudge past one. Very kind of him to pave the way for my sore feet. The daily grind of travel is relentless. Days start early, often before dawn, to make the most of the cooler hours. The journey is long measured in weeks and months, not days. There is the constant dust of the road in summer, the bone-chilling damp in winter, the sting of rain, the bite of the wind. Finding suitable accommodation each night is a recurring concern. If you are fortunate and have the right credentials, you might stay in a mansio, one of the official guest houses maintained by the Cursus Publicus for state travelers. These would offer basic but relatively secure lodging. More often, you might find yourself in a private inn, a capona. These could be lively, noisy, and of highly variable quality. The local capona might advertise clean straw and remarkably few rats tonight. Madam, you appreciate their frankness, though your personal preference might lean more towards absolutely no rats whatsoever, and perhaps a pillow that doesn't smell like a damp dog's forgotten laundry. Increasingly, however, as a devout Christian pilgrim, you would seek out the hospitality of fellow believers, lodging with local bishops in fledgling monasteries or in the homes of pious laypeople, a network of support that is growing along these pilgrim routes. Food and water are constant preoccupations. You might carry some provisions, dried bread, cheese, olives, but mostly you rely on sourcing food in the towns and villages you pass through. The quality of drinking water is always a concern, and dysentery is a constant travel companion in the ancient world. You learn to be cautious, to perhaps add a little wine to your water if you can, a common practice believed to make it safer. Despite the relative peace of the Pax Romana, or what remains of it in this later period, the roads are not without their dangers. Bandits still lurk in remote or forested areas. Illness can strike suddenly far from familiar comforts or skilled physicians. Accidents can happen. There's a background hum of vulnerability, a sense that you are a small, solitary figure moving through a vast and sometimes indifferent world. You pass a milestone that indicates your next major stop. Constantinople is still many, many, many more weeks of uncomfortable jolting away. For a fleeting moment, you entertain the idea of just finding a nice quiet cave by the roadside and declaring yourself a hermit, thus fulfilling your spiritual quota without further ado. But your vow, your affectio, and your increasingly sore but determined feet urge you ever onward eastward. The great capital of the East awaits. Weeks, no months of relentless travel have passed. Egeria. The landscapes of Gaul and perhaps northern Italy have slowly given way to the rugged Balkans. Each milestone past a small victory, each sunrise bringing you a little further east, a little closer to the heart of your spiritual aspirations. The dust of 1,000 Roman miles is caked onto your sturdy sandals and the hem of your practical traveler's tunic. Your initial companions may have changed, some turning back, others joining your small party for a time. But your resolve, that burning affectio, remains undimmed. And then one day, after what seems like an eternity of trundling along those impressively engineered but undeniably monotonous Roman roads, you see it. Constantinople. The city rises before you, a breathtaking spectacle on its strategic peninsula, guarding the passage between Europe and Asia. Even from a distance, its grandeur is apparent. Founded by Emperor Constantine the Great, less than 60 years ago in 330 AD on the site of the ancient Greek colony of Byzantium, it has rapidly blossomed into the magnificent capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, the New Rome. A mainstream historical fact is that Constantinople was deliberately established not only as a new administrative and military center, but also as a preeminent Christian capital designed to rival and eventually eclipse Old Rome in splendor and religious significance. As you approach, you might first glimpse its formidable defenses. The earlier Constantinian walls are already in place, and the even more massive Theodosian walls that will later define it for the millennium are likely under construction or being planned during the period of your visit. This is a city built to impress and to endure. Entering Constantinople is like stepping into another world, a vibrant, pulsating heart of imperial power and Christian devotion. The sheer scale of it is overwhelming, especially if your previous experience has been with the more modestly sized cities of the western provinces. Constantinople is so vast you suspect your internal Roman GPS, which up to this point has mostly consisted of the reliable strategy, follow the main paved road and hope fervently for the best, is about to experience a complete and utter system meltdown. You could probably get hopelessly lost in here for a good week just trying to locate a reputable bakery that doesn't overcharge for yesterday's bread. The streets are a bewildering, exhilarating cacophony of sights, sounds, and smells. You see magnificent marble-paved forums like the Forum of Constantine, with its colossal porphyry column topped by a statue of the city's founder. There are triumphal arches imposing public buildings, and everywhere the signs of burgeoning Christian faith. Churches, some already vast and richly decorated, punctuate the skyline. You would have seen or heard about the predecessors to Justinian's later, even grander Hagia Sophia, or perhaps the Church of the Holy Apostles, already an important imperial mausoleum and pilgrimage site. The exact appearance and layout of some of Constantinople's earliest great churches that Egeria might have visited are still matters of scholarly reconstruction and ongoing archaeological investigation, as many were later rebuilt, expanded, or significantly altered, particularly during the monumental building programs of the 6th century Emperor Justinian IV. But even in your time, their scale and the richness of their mosaics and sacred art would have been awe-inspiring. The air hums with 1,000 sounds, the rumble of iron-wheeled carts on stone, the cries of street vendors hawking their wares from exotic spices of the East to fresh fish from the Bosphorus, the lilting cadences of Greek, which has become the dominant language of the Eastern capital, though Latin is still used in official circles, and the murmur of countless other tongues from across the diverse empire. You're hearing more languages spoken in a single afternoon strolling through the Forum of Constantine than you previously knew existed in the entire world. You bravely try out your best traveler's Latin, honed on the roads of the West, and are met mostly with polite but uncomprehending blank stares or replies in very rapid, very colloquial Greek. It's rapidly becoming clear that it's time to significantly upgrade your point smile and pray for divine linguistic intervention skills. And through it all, from the countless churches, you hear the sound of chanting. the call to prayer, the tolling of bells or Sumantra wooden sounding boards, a constant reminder of the city's deep Christian identity. The smells are equally diverse. The salty tang of the sea air blowing in from the Bosphorus and the Golden Horn. The heady aroma of incense drifting from church doorways, the scent of roasting meats and baking bread from cookshops, mingled inevitably with the less romantic but ever-present odors of a densely populated ancient metropolis. Wood smoke, livestock, and less than perfect sanitation in the poorer quarters. You would likely find lodging through the Christian network. Armed with your letters of introduction from Western bishops, you might be received into the household of a Constantinopolitan bishop, or find a place in one of the growing number of pilgrim hostels Xenodokia established to cater to the influx of devout travelers like yourself. Here you would find a measure of safety, companionship, and guidance for navigating this immense and complex city. Your days in Constantinople are filled with a sense of wonder and spiritual excitement. You attend services in the great churches, marveling at the elaborate liturgies, the rich vestments of the clergy, the shimmering gold mosaics depicting biblical scenes and imperial figures. You visit shrines and venerate relics. You seek out holy men and women eager to learn from their wisdom and piety. You observe the close relationship between the church and the imperial court. The emperor himself is a key figure in religious life, a protector and patron of Christianity. A quirky or fringe tidbit you might become aware of is the immense public passion surrounding the chariot races in the Hippodrome. This vast arena wasn't just for entertainment, it was a major social and political hub. The passionate rivalries between the racing factions, the Blues and the Greens, often spilled over into civic life and even had political ramifications. You hear about the almost fanatical devotion of the supporters, the enormous sums wagered, the occasional riots. You make a quiet mental note not to accidentally wear the wrong team colors, just in case public opinion on theological matters is somehow tied to one's preferred chariot team. Constantinople is a true crossroads of the world. You see people from every corner of the empire and beyond. Stern Roman officials, elegant Greek scholars, shrewd, Syrian merchants, Egyptian monks, rough-hewn Gothic soldiers serving in the imperial army. It's a vibrant, cosmopolitan melting pot, and for you, Egeria, a provincial lady from the far west, it must be an almost overwhelming yet exhilarating experience. This city is not merely a stop on your journey. It's a vital center of the Christian world you are so eager to explore, a gateway to the even more ancient and sacred lands that lie further to the east. The splendors of Constantinople, that magnificent Christian heart of the Eastern Roman Empire, have undoubtedly left an indelible impression on your soul, Egeria. You've witnessed its imperial grandeur, prayed in its burgeoning churches, and perhaps even felt a little overwhelmed by its sheer scale and cosmopolitan energy. But Constantinople, for all its wonders, is a waypoint, not your final destination. Your pilgrim's heart, that insatiable affectio, pulls you ever eastward towards the lands made holy by the very footsteps of Christ and the prophets. After a period of rest, resupply, and no doubt securing fresh letters of introduction from influential Constantinopolitan clergy who marvel at your piety and the audacity of your proposed itinerary, you prepare for the next formidable leg of your journey, the traverse of Asia Minor, or Anatolia, as it's also known. Leaving the great city likely involves a ferry journey across the shimmering waters of the Bosphorus from Europe to Asia, perhaps landing at Chalcedon or another port on the Asiatic shore. As the boat pulls away, you look back at Constantinople's impressive skyline, its domes and columns receding into the distance, a final glimpse of imperial order before you plunge into the vast, rugged interior of Anatolia. This land, a core territory of the Eastern Roman Empire, is ancient. Its history stretching back millennia, and it was one of the earliest cradles of Christianity. The Apostle Paul himself traversed these regions extensively, founding churches and spreading the gospel. You are quite literally following in his footsteps and those of countless other saints and martyrs. The landscape that unfolds before you is dramatically different from the more settled regions of the West or the urban sophistication of Constantinople. Anatolia is a land of high arid plateaus, stark mountain ranges, like the formidable Taurus chain which you will eventually have to navigate in deep, fertile river valleys. The climate can be extreme, scorching hot in the summers on the plains, bitterly cold in the winters at higher elevations. These Anatolian mountain roads, many of them vital Roman military routes, make the ones back in Gaul or Hispania look like freshly smoothed boulevards designed for a leisurely afternoon promenade. Your poor, long-suffering mule, if you have one, is probably developing a deeply philosophical outlook on the concept of endless switchbacks, and seems to be silently composing a tragic ballad about the fundamental unfairness of gravity as applied to heavily laden pack animals. The exact routes taken by pilgrims like Egeria through central and eastern Anatolia, and the specific conditions they faced, are often reconstructed by scholars through a combination of her sometimes geographically vague account, as the initial parts of her journey are in the lost section of the manuscript. Later pilgrim itineraries and archaeological evidence of Roman roads and settlements, leaving room for interpretation regarding specific stopovers and the detours she might have taken to visit particular shrines or holy men. However, it's clear you are primarily relying on the existing Roman road network, the Cursus Publicus, where accessible, and the growing infrastructure of Christian hospitality. Travel here is slower, more challenging. While still within the empire, some regions are remote, sparsely populated, and potentially less secure than the areas you've passed through so far. Banditry is an ever-present concern in isolated mountain passes or lonely stretches of road. You might hear tales of the Isaurians' fierce mountain peoples from southern Anatolia who were notorious for their brigandage and periodically troubled the Roman authorities. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some of these remote mountain passes in Anatolia were sometimes guarded by small military detachments or stationi. These weren't just there to deter bandits, they also often functioned as customs posts, collecting tolls on goods or ensuring travelers weren't smuggling contraband. Your status as a pious pilgrim, perhaps bearing impressive letters from bishops, might earn you a respectful passage, or it might just lead to a very polite but firm interrogation about the contents of your saddlebags and whether you've remembered to declare that extra loaf of bread for the imperial road tax. Your reliance on Christian communities becomes even more critical. As you journey from city to city, perhaps passing through historic Christian centers like Nicaea site of the famous Council on Syra, modern Ankara, or Caesarea Mazaca in Cappadocia. You seek out the local bishop, present your letters, and are generally welcomed with warmth and assistance. These communities, often founded in the apostolic age, are steeped in Christian history and tradition. You visit their churches, venerate their local saints and martyrs, and share fellowship with fellow believers. Even more profoundly, you begin to encounter the burgeoning monastic movement that is taking root in the wilder, more remote parts of Anatolia and Syria. Inspired by the Desert Fathers of Egypt, ascetic men and women are retreating to caves, mountainsides, and isolated communities to pursue lives of prayer, contemplation, and extreme austerity. You, with your deep piety and intense curiosity about all forms of Christian devotion, are eager to meet these holy individuals, to learn from their wisdom, and to witness their rigorous spiritual practices. The monks, when you find their often well-hidden hermitages or small coenobitic communities, might offer you their finest hospitality. A hard bed on a straw mat, some even harder. Barley bread, a cup of clean water from their spring. And if you're fortunate, a very long, very earnest discussion about the precise nature of angelic hierarchies or the best way to combat demonic temptations. It's not exactly a luxury spa retreat with fluffy towels and room service, but the spiritual insights are plentiful. And the bread you reflect is certainly character building, if not particularly kind to your dental work. Despite the remoteness, the presence of the Roman state is still felt. The military roads are maintained, bridges span rivers, and the Cursus Publicus, the imperial mail and transport service, functions, however, sporadically in the more distant regions. In her surviving text, Egeria mentions several times being provided with an official escort of soldiers by local Roman commanders when traveling through areas considered particularly dangerous, a courtesy likely extended due to her apparent high status and the official letters she carried. This mail system, not just for letters but for official travel, is a lifeline. As you journey deeper into Asia Minor, the sheer scale of the continent, the vastness of the landscapes, and the increasing sense of isolation likely make a profound impression. The familiar Latin West is far behind you now. You are immersed in a world that is predominantly Greek-speaking, with a myriad of local Anatolian dialects and cultures bubbling beneath the surface of Roman imperial uniformity. You try your carefully practiced formal Greek on a local goat herd you meet on a mountain path, hoping to ask for directions or the location of the nearest spring. He listens, patiently nods, and then replies in a dialect so thick and full of unfamiliar guttural sounds that you suspect he might actually be communicating directly with his goats, and furthermore that they probably understand him far better than you do. Sign language. A hopeful smile and a silent prayer for guidance once again become your most reliable communication tools. Yet, through all the hardships, the difficult terrain, the unpredictable weather, the linguistic challenges, the ever-present undercurrent of potential danger, your faith and determination propel you forward. Each mountain range crossed, each river forded, each new Christian community encountered only strengthens your resolve. You are a pilgrim on a sacred quest, and the heart of that quest, Jerusalem, lies still further to the east, beyond the formidable barrier of the Taurus Mountains and the ancient lands of Syria. Section 5. The rugged, often desolate beauty of the Anatolian highlands is slowly, painstakingly left behind you, Egeria. That challenging traverse with its towering mountain ranges, its remote monastic communities, and its long, lonely stretches of Roman road has tested your endurance and deepened your pilgrim's resolve. You may have had to navigate treacherous passes like the Cilician Gates, the ancient gateway through the Taurus Mountains, a narrow defile that has seen countless armies and travelers pass through its dramatic, rocky embrace for millennia. Now, as you descend from those high plateaus, the landscape begins to change. The air grows warmer, the vegetation more lush, and you feel yourself entering a region steeped even more profoundly in ancient history and biblical resonance, Roman Syria. Your ultimate destination, Jerusalem, feels palpably closer, and your heart quickens with a mixture of awe and eager anticipation. Your immediate goal, however, is another jewel of the Roman East, a city whose name echoes through the annals of both classical antiquity and early Christianity, Antioch on the Orontes. As you approach, its sheer scale becomes apparent. This is no mere provincial town. Antioch is one of the largest, wealthiest, and most important cities in the entire Roman Empire, ranking alongside Rome, Alexandria, and your recent stop, Constantinople. Antioch isn't just like some dusty provincial backwater you stumble upon. It's like the ancient world's equivalent of New York, London, and Paris, all rolled into one bustling, chaotic, and incredibly influential metropolis, but with significantly more togas, a distinct aroma of roasting spices, and a much higher chance of bumping into someone who personally knew an apostle's third cousin twice removed. The city is impressively fortified, sprawling on both sides of the Orontes River. With the imposing Mount Silpius looming over it, its slopes dotted with shrines and villas. A mainstream historical fact is that Antioch on the Orontes, founded by Seleucus before Nicator around 300 BC, served as the capital of the Seleucid Empire and later became a vital administrative, commercial, and cultural hub of Roman Syria. Crucially for you, Egeria, it was a pivotal center for early Christianity. It was here in this very city, as the Book of Acts records, that the followers of Jesus were first called Christians. Mabodi, you're actually in Antioch, the place where they literally coined the term Christian. You half expect to find a slightly weathered, almost 2,000-year-old blue plaque somewhere saying, "On this very spot, circa 44 AD, someone finally got tired of saying those rather enthusiastic Nazarene folk, and came up with a much catchier brand name." History quite literally was made on these streets. Antioch is a true cosmopolitan melting pot. As you navigate its wide, colonnaded main street, famously said by some ancient writers to have been illuminated at night by lamps, a rare luxury, you are surrounded by a vibrant throng. You hear a babble of languages, the elegant Greek of scholars and merchants, the official Latin of Roman administrators and soldiers, the Aramaic dialects of the local Syrian population, the Hebrew of its ancient Jewish community, and the languages of countless traders and travelers from Persia, Arabia, and beyond. The city is a riot of color, sound, and smell. Shops spill their wares onto the pavements. Fine silks, exotic spices, intricate metalwork, locally produced glassware. Food vendors call out their offerings. The air is rich with the aroma of baking bread, roasting meat, and the fragrant incense wafting from both Christian churches and the few remaining, though likely declining, pagan temples. For you, the Christian significance of Antioch is paramount. It is one of the ancient patriarchates, AAC, founded according to tradition by the Apostle Peter himself before he went to Rome. It was a major center for theological thought and debate, home to influential figures and the distinct Antiochene school of biblical interpretation, known for its more literal and historical approach, compared to the allegorical methods favored by the Alexandrian school. The exact nature and extent of the theological disputes between the Alexandrian and Antiochene schools of Christian thought during Egeria's visit, and how much a pilgrim like her, primarily focused on visiting holy sites, and observing liturgical practices would have been aware of or deeply involved in these complex intellectual currents, remain subjects of ongoing scholarly discussion. However, as an educated and keenly observant woman, you would certainly have been aware of Antioch's status as a major Christian intellectual center. Armed with your letters of introduction, you would seek out the Bishop of Antioch, a figure of immense authority in the Eastern Church. You would be welcomed into the Christian community, perhaps staying in a xenodochian or as a guest in an ecclesiastical residence. You would eagerly visit the great Church of Antioch, an octagonal structure begun by Constantine and completed by his son Constantius II, renowned for its size and splendor. You would also seek out other churches and shrines associated with the apostles, particularly that Peter and Paul, who both spent significant time in the city. You meticulously observe the local liturgical practices, the way hymns are sung, the structure of the services, the reverence of the congregation. All details you will later record for your sisters back home. A quirky or fringe tidbit concerning Antioch is its famous or perhaps infamous suburb of Daphne. In earlier centuries, Daphne was renowned for its beautiful groves, its temple dedicated to Apollo, and its rather licentious festivals. By your time in the late 4th century, with Christianity now dominant, Daphne's pagan glories would be much faded. The temple might be in ruins or converted to Christian use, the sacred groves perhaps less frequented for their original purposes. Yet the memory of Daphne's luxurious, pleasure-seeking past might still linger, a subtle counterpoint to the city's now prominent Christian piety. After a period of rest, prayer, and exploration in this venerable city, absorbing its history, its spiritual energy, and no doubt gathering more information and perhaps even companions for the next stage, you prepare to move on. Your sojourn in Antioch, while spiritually enriching, is still a prelude. The ultimate goal, Jerusalem, lies further south through the remainder of Roman Syria and into Palestine. As you depart Antioch, perhaps following the coastal road or an inland route, the landscape begins to shift again. You pass through other ancient cities with rich histories: Laodicea, Berytus, modern Beirut, Tyre, Sidon, Ptolemais, Acre, and the impressive Roman port of Caesarea Maritima, the administrative capital of Roman Judea. After the often challenging and somewhat wild mountain goat tracks of Anatolia, some of these Syrian and Palestinian Roman roads might feel like divinely paved superhighways in comparison. Your trusty mule, if it could express itself in words, is probably humming cheerful, if slightly off-key psalms in sheer relief at the prospect of slightly less perilous and vertically challenging travel. Each city, past each mile covered, brings you closer to the emotional and spiritual climax of your pilgrimage. The anticipation is almost unbearable. The ancient grandeur of Antioch, with its rich Christian heritage and bustling cosmopolitan life, has served as a vital and spiritually invigorating stop on your incredible eastward journey, Egeria. You've absorbed its history, prayed in its venerable churches, and perhaps even picked up a few more phrases in Greek, the lingua franca of this part of the Roman world. But Antioch, for all its significance, is still not the ultimate destination. The magnetic pull of Jerusalem, the holy city, the very epicenter of your faith, grows stronger with each passing day, with each southward mile you cover through the Roman provinces of Syria and Palestine. The landscapes you now traverse are increasingly resonant with biblical history. The rolling hills of Judea, the ancient pathways once trod by patriarchs, prophets, and the apostles themselves. Your anticipation after so many months, perhaps even years of arduous travel, is a palpable thing. A tightening in your chest, a fervent prayer constantly on your lips. And then, finally, it happens. You round a bend in the road, or crest a hill, and there it is. Jerusalem. The city sits perched amidst its limestone hills, its walls, perhaps the Aelia Capitolina walls built by Hadrian, later incorporated, or expanded upon by Christian emperors, gleaming in the Mediterranean sun. The sight of the Mount of Olives rising to the east of the city would be instantly recognizable and profoundly moving. After what must have felt like an eternity of dusty roads, questionable embeds, and the constant uncertainties of ancient travel, seeing Jerusalem for the very first time probably makes you want to fall to your knees and kiss the sacred ground, or at least find a particularly devout-looking rock by the roadside and give it a long, respectful, and slightly tearful hug. The emotions are undoubtedly running incredibly high. As you draw closer and pass through one of the city gates, perhaps the Damascus Gate to the north, or the western gate leading from the direction of Jaffa, You are immediately enveloped by the unique atmosphere of the Holy City. It is a bustling place, certainly filled with local inhabitants, Roman soldiers from the garrison merchants, and increasingly pilgrims like yourself drawn from every corner of the Christian world. You hear Aramaic, Greek, Latin, and perhaps other tongues spoken in its narrow, winding streets. But underlying the everyday clamor is an almost tangible sense of religious intensity, an awareness that this is no ordinary city. This is the place where heaven and earth are believed to have met in a unique and transformative way. Your first act upon entering Jerusalem, as you meticulously record later for your sisters, is one of profound thanksgiving and prayer. The tears that well in your eyes are not just from weariness, but from the overwhelming joy and relief of having finally reached the goal of your immense pilgrimage. This is it. This is what your affectia, your deep spiritual longing, has driven you towards for so long. This is the hallowed ground you have dreamed of treading. Christian Jerusalem in the late 4th century is a city in the midst of a remarkable transformation. A mainstream historical fact is that by this period, Jerusalem had become a major Christian pilgrimage destination, largely due to the extensive and magnificent building projects initiated by Emperor Constantine the Great and his mother Helena in the earlier part of the century. These imperial patrons had sought to identify, excavate, and enshrine the most sacred sites associated with the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. The absolute heart of Christian Jerusalem, and undoubtedly one of your primary destinations, is the sprawling complex of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This isn't a single building, but a collection of sacred structures built over the traditional sites of Christ's crucifixion at Golgotha and his nearby tomb, the Anastasis resurrection. You would have approached it with profound awe. Imagine stepping into the vast Constantinian Basilica, the Martyrion with its soaring columns and rich mosaics leading towards the outdoor courtyard that contained the Rock of Golgotha itself. And then the magnificent Anastasis Rotunda, a circular structure built directly over the rock-cut tomb where Christ's body was laid and from which he rose. The exact topography and precise identification of some holy sites within Constantinian Jerusalem described by Egeria, including the internal layout and specific liturgical arrangements of the Holy Sepulchre complex, are still subjects of intense archaeological investigation and scholarly textual analysis. As a Sines the city has undergone numerous destructions, rebuilds, and transformations over the subsequent centuries, particularly with the Crusader-era reconstructions of the Holy Sepulchre. However, your detailed descriptions of the services and the layout as you experienced it are an invaluable window into this earlier period. You don't just glance at these places, you immerse yourself in them. You attend the daily services, you listen intently as the local bishops and priests explain the significance of each spot, often reading directly from the Gospels to connect the physical location with the sacred text. Your piety is matched only by your insatiable curiosity. You want to see everything, understand everything. You visit other key sites, Mount Zion, where the Church of the Apostles was believed to stand over the site of the Last Supper, the Cenacle and the Pentecost. You make your way to the Mount of Olives, visiting the Eliona Church, built over the cave where Jesus was said to have taught his disciples, and perhaps an early structure commemorating the Ascension. Though the grander octagonal church there might have been completed slightly after your visit, or was in its early stages. A quirky or fringe tidbit about pilgrimage in this era is the intense desire of pilgrims not just to see the major imperially sanctioned shrines, but also to seek out a multitude of smaller, more obscure sites associated with often minor biblical figures or local traditions. Guides, both official clergy and perhaps less official local entrepreneurs, would point out the stone where Stephen was stoned, or the column to which Christ was tied for flagellation, or even, as you might wryly note, the exact spot where the third donkey on the left accidentally sneezed during the triumphal entry into Jerusalem. Bahia. You, Egeria, are notably keen on verifying the authenticity of sites, frequently asking your guides to show you the scriptural passages that confirm the holiness of a particular place. You're not here for a mere folklore, you're seeking a direct, textually grounded connection to sacred history. Though when presented with a particularly earnest local tradition, you probably nod reverently anyway. No need to offend your host while on a mission of divine enlightenment. The Bishop of Jerusalem and his clergy become your essential guides and hosts. You present your letters of introduction, and they welcome you, recognizing your devotion and perhaps your status. They arrange for you to see the sites, they explain the local customs and liturgical practices, and they answer your endless questions. For you, these are not just stones and buildings, they are places suffused with divine presence where the events of salvation history unfolded. The history here feels intensely alive, almost contemporary. Jerusalem has finally embraced you, and you, with tears of gratitude and a pilgrim's fervent heart, are ready to explore every sacred inch of its hallowed ground. There are so many holy sites packed into this ancient city, you start to worry you might accidentally trip over a venerable relic on your way to the market to buy some dates. Oh, my deepest apologies, Sacred Flagstone. I didn't realize you were the precise spot where... The sheer density of holiness is almost overwhelming. The overwhelming flood of initial emotion upon finally reaching Jerusalem has perhaps begun to subside. Egeria replaced by a deep, abiding sense of awe and a fervent desire to immerse yourself fully in the sacred rhythms of this unique city. You've likely found lodging perhaps through the good offices of the Bishop of Jerusalem, Cyril, or his successor John, or within one of the burgeoning Christian guesthouses, Xenodokia, designed to accommodate the ever-increasing stream of pilgrims like yourself. Now, with a base established, you settle into what becomes a meticulous, almost scholarly exploration of Jerusalem's holy places, a routine driven by your profound piety and your keen, observant nature. You are, after all, not just here for yourself, you are meticulously documenting everything for your beloved sisters back in the distant West. You're taking such incredibly detailed notes for them, describing every church, every service, every hymn. They're practically going to be able to reconstruct 4th century Jerusalem, brick by holy brick, just from your vivid descriptions. You are, in essence, the ancient world's most dedicated and devout travel blogger, but with significantly more reverence and considerably fewer sponsored posts for olive oil. Your days in Jerusalem quickly fall into a sacred pattern, largely dictated by the rich and elaborate liturgical cycle of the Jerusalem Church. A mainstream historical fact is that the Christian liturgy in 4th century Jerusalem, particularly at the major shrines like the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, was highly developed with a complex daily and weekly cycle of services. These services, vividly documented in your writings, Egeria attracted large numbers of the local faithful, as well as international pilgrims, and are a primary source for our understanding of early Christian worship. Your typical day starts incredibly early, well before the sun even considers making an appearance over the Mount of Olives. Your day in Jerusalem starts before the local roosters have even contemplated hitting their snooze button for the first time. Vigils at the Anastasis, the Church of the Resurrection, built over Christ's tomb, are a pre-dawn affair. Imagine yourself, Egeria, wrapped in a warm cloak against the pre-dawn chill of the Judean hills, making your way through the still, dark, silent streets of Jerusalem, perhaps with a small group of fellow pilgrims, or guided by a local monk carrying a flickering lamp. You arrive at the great church, its interior illuminated by hundreds of oil lamps and candles, their light glinting off gold mosaics and polished marble. The air is thick with the scent of incense, the murmur of prayers, and the solemn, beautiful chanting of psalms and hymns by choirs of monks and virgins, dedicated female ascetics. The bishop himself or one of his priests presides, leading the faithful in these early morning devotions. You are fueled by faith, by divine grace, and by what you suspect is a very early, very potent form of slightly gritty roasted barley coffee that the local monks might offer to sustain the vigilant. Throughout the day, there are further services, not just at the Holy Sepulchre, but at other sacred sites dotted around the city. You describe attending Mass, listening to scripture readings, and hearing sermons delivered by the bishops and priests. These sermons are often given in Greek, the primary liturgical language of the Eastern Church. But you note with approval that for the benefit of the local Aramaic/Syriac-speaking population, and perhaps for Latin-speaking Westerners like yourself, priests or deacons would often provide translations or summaries. The bishop might preach a profoundly moving sermon in eloquent classical Greek. You, with your Western Latin background, probably catch about every fifth word, but you nod along with deep reverence and focus anyway. The important thing is the spiritual ambience, the shared sense of devotion, and the fact that everyone else in the congregation looks equally moved, or perhaps just equally sleepy from the very early start to the day. Beyond attending the set services, a significant part of your routine involves guided visits to the holy places. You don't just wander aimlessly, you are usually accompanied by local clergy, priests, deacons, or learned monks, who act as your expert guides. They take you to each site, explain its biblical significance, point out specific features, and read the relevant passages from the scriptures that connect the physical place to the sacred narrative. You are a keen and critical observer. You don't just passively accept what you're told. You often ask probing questions, wanting to see the scriptural basis for the identification of a particular spot. The precise extent to which the liturgical practices Egeria describes in Jerusalem were unique local developments versus influences from other major Christian centers like Alexandria or Constantinople is a complex question for liturgical historians, who analyze her text for clues about the evolution and cross-pollination of early Christian worship traditions across the Roman Empire. You don't just tick sites off a list like a hurried modern tourist. You return to them again and again, participating in different services held there at various times, absorbing their unique atmosphere and reflecting deeply on their meaning. You climb the Mount of Olives, you visit the site of the Last Supper on Mount Zion, you trace the path of Christ's Passion. Each visit is an opportunity for prayer, for contemplation, for a deeper connection with the events that define your faith. You also make a point of meeting and conversing with the local holy men and women, the monks and dedicated virgins who have devoted their lives to prayer and asceticism in and around Jerusalem. You admire their piety, their discipline, their deep knowledge of the scriptures, and you are eager to learn from their spiritual experiences. These encounter spotters provide another layer to your understanding of the living faith in this sacred city. A quirky and fascinating tidbit you meticulously record is the widespread practice among pilgrims of taking the eulogii, or blessings propaganda, from the holy places. These weren't elaborate souvenirs in the modern sense, but rather small, tangible tokens imbued with the sanctity of the site. A little oil from a lamp burning at Christ's tomb, a few grains of dust from Golgotha, a tiny fragment of stone from a sacred cave, or even water that had touched a holy relic. These eulogii were carefully collected and treasured, taken back home as powerful mementos, sources of spiritual comfort, and tangible links to the holy places. It was an early, deeply spiritual form of relic collecting, or souvenir hunting, connecting the pilgrim to the sacred long after their journey ended. Your days in Jerusalem, therefore, are a rich tapestry of intense liturgical participation, methodical exploration, intellectual inquiry, and profound spiritual immersion. You are not just a visitor, you are an active, engaged participant in the sacred rhythms of the holy city, meticulously observing and recording every detail so that your sisters far away can share in the blessings of your extraordinary pilgrimage. Jerusalem, with its profound sanctity and its vibrant, complex liturgical life, has become the spiritual epicenter of your world, Egeria. You have meticulously immersed yourself in its daily rhythms of prayer and worship, explored its most sacred shrines, and filled your mind and your notes with every detail for those beloved sisters back home. But your incredible affection, that deep spiritual yearning that propelled you from the far west, is not yet satisfied. Jerusalem may be the heart, but the Holy Land is a body puro, and you are determined to trace every vein, to visit every place touched by the divine narrative. You'd think after months, possibly years of dusty roads and the sheer emotional and spiritual intensity of Jerusalem Egeria, you might want a nice extended sit-down in a quiet courtyard with a cup of something warm and non-challenging. But no, your spiritual checklist is long, and there are many more holy rocks to see, more sacred hills to climb, more biblical landscapes to experience firsthand your Fitbit. If such a device existed in the 4th century, would be both utterly amazed at your daily step count and probably a little bit terrified for its own internal mechanisms. So your spiritual quest expands beyond the walls of Jerusalem. One of your first and most important excursions is southwards to Bethlehem, the birthplace of Jesus. It's a relatively short journey from Jerusalem, perhaps 6 Roman miles through the terraced hills of Judea. The road itself is imbued with history. As you travel, you might pass by the traditional site of Rachel's tomb, a place of reverence. Arriving in Bethlehem, your focus is, of course, the magnificent Church of the Nativity, another of Emperor Constantine's great Christian basilicas built over the grotto, traditionally venerated as the very spot where Christ was born. You descend into the sacred cave, the air cool and still illuminated by flickering lamps. The sense of awe of being present at the genesis of the Christian story is profound. You observe the rich silver and gold decorations, you participate in the services held there, and you carefully note every detail. The layout of the church, the specific location of the manger, the reverence of the local monks and clergy who tend the shrine. But your explorations don't stop there. A mainstream historical fact is that Christian pilgrims in the 4th century, like yourself Egeria, often undertook quite extensive and sometimes arduous journeys from Jerusalem to other significant biblical sites throughout Palestine and Galilee. They sought to visit places directly associated with the life and ministry of Jesus, and the apostles wanting to connect the scriptural accounts with tangible geographical reality. So after Bethlehem, you set your sights further afield. A more substantial expedition takes you north into Galilee. This journey is longer, taking several days, and involves careful planning and reliance on the network of Christian hospitality. You traverse the landscapes that Jesus himself knew so well: the hills, the valleys, the shores of the Sea of Galilee, Lake Tiberias, as it's also known. Here you visit Capernaum, described in the Gospels as Jesus' own town during his Galilean ministry. You see the remains of its synagogue, though the exact identification and state of preservation of some of the lesser shrines in specific locations Egeria describes in Galilee and Judea are subjects of ongoing archaeological research and debate. As landscapes change, earthquakes occur, and later building traditions sometimes overlaid or confused earlier site identifications. You visit Tabgha, the traditional site of the multiplication of the loaves and fishes, and the place where Jesus appeared to his disciples after the resurrection. You climb the Mount of Beatitudes, where Jesus delivered the Sermon on the Mount. The air filled with the scent of wild herbs, the panoramic view of the lake below, inspiring quiet contemplation. Nazareth, the town of Jesus' childhood where the Annunciation took place, is another essential stop. You seek out the cave dwelling believed to be Mary's home now, likely incorporated into a church. And then there is Mount Tabor, the traditional site of the Transfiguration. Your account details the ascent of this considerable mountain. Imagine yourself Egeria, perhaps with a local monk as a guide toiling up the steep, rocky path. It's hot, your legs ache, your breath comes in gasps. You're pretty sure your sturdy Roman sandals, which have already carried you thousands of miles, are considering filing for early retirement, and perhaps even applying for sainthood themselves after this particular ordeal. But the spiritual significance of the site, the desire to pray where Christ was transfigured in glory before his disciples, drives you onward. The panoramic view from the summit and the deep sense of holiness pervading the churches built there make the arduous climb worthwhile. Your travels also take you to other significant Old Testament locations. You journey to Hebron, south of Bethlehem, to visit the cave of Machpelah, the tomb of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their wives. This is a site of immense reverence for both Jews and Christians, a direct link to the very foundations of monotheistic faith. You travel down towards the Jordan Valley, visiting Jericho, one of the oldest cities in the world, and crucially the Jordan River itself, near the traditional spot of Jesus' baptism by John the Baptist. You might even gaze across the strange, lifeless waters of the Dead Sea from a distance, a stark and desolate landscape. Further north in Samaria, you visit Sebasti, where you are shown the traditional tombs of John the Baptist and the prophets Elisha and Obadiah. Throughout these excursions, your method remains consistent, keen observation, deep piety, and a constant cross-referencing with the scriptures. You are often guided by local monks or clergy who point out the significant features of each site and share its associated traditions. A quirky or fringe tidbit you often note with admiration, and perhaps a touch of bewildered amusement, is the extreme asceticism of many of these holy men who act as your guides. They accompany you on strenuous climbs, subsist on incredibly meager diets of bread water and a few wild herbs, and spend their nights in prayer in bare cells or caves. You marvel at their endurance and their devotion, even if you yourself are probably quite grateful for the occasional more substantial meal offered by a hospitable bishop. The local monk guide, with unwavering beatific conviction, might point to a small, otherwise unremarkable indentation in a rock. And this venerable sister, heed and tone, is the precise spot where the Archangel Gabriel paused to adjust his celestial sandal strap just before delivering the good news to the Holy Virgin Mary in Nazareth. You would of course nod with deep reverence and make a careful note for your sisters. One doesn't question divinely adjusted footwear on a holy pilgrimage. it's simply not done. Each of these journeys beyond Jerusalem deepens your faith, transforming the words of Scripture into a lived geographical reality. The hills Jesus walked. The lake he calmed, the mountains he prayed upon. These are no longer just names in a sacred text. They are tangible places you have seen with your own eyes, touched with your own hands, and sanctified with your own prayers. Your spiritual quest is becoming an intricate map of the Holy Land, etched not just onto parchment, but onto your very soul. Section 9. Your journeys throughout the wider Holy Land Egeria, from the birthplace of Jesus in Bethlehem to the shores of Galilee and the tombs of patriarchs in Hebron, have etched the biblical narrative onto the very landscape of your experience. Each site visited, each mountain climbed, has deepened your understanding and your already profound faith. Now, as the seasons turn, you find yourself back in Jerusalem, or perhaps you've timed one of your extended stays in the city to coincide with the most sacred and intensely observed period in the entire Christian calendar, Holy Week and Easter. And it is your meticulous day-by-day account of these celebrations in late 4th century Jerusalem that will become one of the most precious and illuminating parts of your letter to your sisters, a unique window for us into the heart of early Christian worship. A mainstream historical fact is that Egeria's itinerarium provides an exceptionally detailed, almost minute-by-minute eyewitness account of the liturgical practices in Jerusalem during Holy Week and Easter. Her descriptions of the processions, vigils, services, scriptural readings, hymns, and the active participation of clergy and laity are invaluable for understanding the development of Christian liturgy and the religious life of Jerusalem in this pivotal era. These are not just brief mentions. You dedicate a substantial portion of your writing to these solemn and joyful days, clearly recognizing their supreme importance. These Holy Week services, as you describe them, are not for the spiritually faint of heart, or for those who get a bit fidgety after 20 minutes in a pew. We're talking all-day, all-night affairs, a marathon of devotion. Your Roman endurance Egeria is clearly being tested on a whole new, divinely epic level. You must have hoped you brought spiritual snacks, or at least some incredibly comfortable sandals for all that standing, kneeling, and processing. The week begins with Palm Sunday. You describe a deeply moving reenactment of Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem. In the afternoon, the entire congregation, led by the bishop, processes from the Church of the Eleona on the Mount of Olives, the place where Jesus taught his disciples. They make their way down the mount, carrying palm and olive branches, singing hymns and antiphons with children, joyfully shouting, "Hosanna!" The bishop himself, you note, sometimes rides on a donkey just as Jesus did. The procession swells with local people and pilgrims as it makes its way through the city gates and up to the Anastasis, the Church of the Resurrection. The atmosphere is one of joyful anticipation, yet tinged with the solemn awareness of the passion that is to come. The days that follow, Holy Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, are marked by special services held in various churches throughout the city. There are extended scripture readings focusing on the events leading up to Christ's suffering and death, particularly from the Gospels. The mood in the city grows more somber, more intensely focused. You, along with throngs of other faithful, move from one sacred site to another, participating in these preparatory liturgies. Maundy Thursday, commemorating the Last Supper. And Jesus' agony in the Garden of Gethsemane is a day of profound spiritual depth. You describe special Eucharistic services. You might also have witnessed or participated in a foot-washing ceremony, reenacting Christ's humble service to his disciples. But the emotional climax of the day, as you recount, is the all-night vigil held on the Mount of Olives in the church at Gethsemane. The entire congregation, it seems, makes its way there after evening services in the city. Throughout the night, in the very place where Jesus prayed in agony, there are continuous readings from the Gospels, hymns, psalms, and prayers, led by the bishop and his clergy. You describe the scene with palpable emotion. The flickering lamplight, the sound of sorrowful chants echoing in the cool night air, the shared grief and empathy of the assembled faithful. It is an experience designed to bring the participants as close as possible to the reality of Christ's suffering. Good Friday dawns the most solemn day of the Christian year. The focus of devotion is the veneration of the relic of the true cross. This sacred relic, believed to have been discovered by Emperor Constantine's mother, Helena, is brought out and displayed in the chapel at Golgotha within the Holy Sepulchre complex. The bishop sits holding the holy wood while the faithful file past one by one to bow touch the cross with their forehead and eyes and then kiss it. Your description of this ceremony includes a wonderfully human, slightly quirky, and entirely believable tidbit. You mentioned that deacons stand on either side watching very carefully because in the past, some overly enthusiastic pilgrims had apparently tried to bite off small pieces of the sacred wood to take home as personal relics. So there was a very strict venerate, don't masticate, good people policy in place enforced by vigilant deacons. After this veneration, there are services held at Golgotha itself with continuous readings of the Passion narratives from the Gospels, interspersed with psalms and prayers of lamentation, lasting for many hours. The atmosphere throughout the city is one of profound grief and mourning. Holy Saturday is a day of quiet anticipation, leading into the great vigil of Easter, the climax of the entire liturgical year. This, too, is an all-night service beginning in darkness. You describe the solemn lighting of the new fire and the paschal candle symbolizing Christ as the light of the world. There are extensive scripture readings throughout the night recounting the story of salvation from creation to the resurrection. This is also the traditional time for the baptism of new catechumens who are then welcomed into the full communion of the Church. The long vigil culminates in the joyous celebration of the Easter Eucharist as dawn breaks on Easter Sunday, Easter morning in Jerusalem. As you paint it, must have felt like the entire city had collectively held its breath through the sorrow of the Passion, and then exhaled in a single explosive burst of pure joy. After the profound solemnity of Good Friday and the intense watchful stillness of the all-night vigil Easter Sunday is a scene of unbridled jubilation. Services at the Anastasis, the site of the resurrection, are triumphant. The hymns are joyful, the vestments brilliant, the message of Christ's victory over death proclaimed with exultant conviction. The city is transformed from mourning to celebration. Liturgical historians meticulously analyze Egeria's descriptions of these Holy Week hymns, prayers, processions, and ceremonial actions to trace the origins and development of specific Christian rites, often debating which elements were unique to the Jerusalem church at that time and which reflected broader liturgical trends emerging across the Eastern and Western churches of the late Roman Empire. Your detailed observations, Egeria, provide an unparalleled snapshot of this living, evolving tradition. You are not just a tourist, you are a deeply engaged participant sharing in the collective grief and the transcendent joy of these sacred days and preserving their memory for centuries to come. Section 10. The profound spiritual immersion of Holy Week in Jerusalem, with its solemn lamentations and exultant Easter joy, has left an indelible mark upon your soul, Egeria. You have witnessed the heart of Christian worship in its most sacred setting, but your pilgrim spirit, that unquenchable affectio, still yearns for more, particularly for the sites steeped in the ancient history of the Old Testament. And so, after the intense experiences in Jerusalem, you turn your gaze southwards towards the stark, majestic, and spiritually charged wilderness of the Sinai Peninsula. Your goal to stand on the very mountain where Moses encountered God and received the Ten Commandments. So, after the relative gentle strolls around Jerusalem's many holy sites, you decide a casual, leisurely trek across the Sinai Desert, known for its temperate climate and abundance of five-star pilgrim hostels, is next on the agenda. Your idea of a relaxing spiritual retreat, Egeria, is clearly rather different from most people's. One hopes you've packed extra sun hats of several very large water skins and perhaps a detailed map of every known oasis between here and well anywhere. This is no small undertaking. The journey from Jerusalem to Mount Sinai is long, arduous, and fraught with the perils of desert travel. You would need to make careful preparations, securing reliable guides, likely local monks or Bedouin tribesmen familiar with the treacherous routes and the locations of precious water sources. Arranging for transport, probably sturdy camels or donkeys capable of enduring the harsh conditions, and gathering enough provisions, water-dried food by naan, to sustain you and your companions for many days in a land that offers little natural sustenance. You are venturing into a true wilderness, a landscape of breathtaking desolation and profound silence. As you leave, the relatively fertile hills of Judea behind, the terrain transforms. You enter a world of towering, sun-baked granite mountains, vast empty plains of sand and gravel, and deep, winding wadis or dry riverbeds. The heat during the day can be ferocious, the sun beating down mercilessly with little shade to be found. At night, the desert air can turn surprisingly bitingly cold. Water is the most precious commodity, its scarcity a constant concern. Yet there is a stark, austere beauty to this landscape, a sense of immense antiquity and raw elemental power that resonates deeply with the biblical narratives of the Exodus. You are in a very real sense walking through the pages of the Old Testament. Every mountain, every valley seems to whisper stories of the Israelites' 40 years of wandering. The precise route of the Exodus and the exact identification of the biblical Mount Sinai remain subjects of ongoing scholarly debate and archaeological investigation. As Egeria's account itself describes visiting several significant peaks in the region, reflecting 4th century traditions, though modern scholarship continues to explore various theories. Your journey likely takes you through established caravan routes, or perhaps paths known only to the desert monks. You pass through the oasis of Paran, often identified with the Firan Oasis, a surprisingly green and fertile area in the midst of the barrenness with palm groves water and a small Christian community including monasteries. This would be a vital place to rest, resupply, and perhaps gather more local guidance before tackling the final, most sacred part of your Sinai pilgrimage. Finally, after many days of challenging travel, you arrive at the foot of the holy mountain range itself. In your time at Egeria, the tradition already strongly identified Jebel Musa, the Mountain of Moses, as the true Mount Sinai, though you also visit other nearby significant peaks like Jebel Sirbal. The sight of these towering, rugged granite peaks imbued with such profound religious significance must be awe-inspiring. This is where God is said to have descended in fire and cloud, where the law was given, where the covenant with Israel was forged. The ascent of Mount Sinai is the spiritual and physical climax of this leg of your journey. It is not an easy climb. The paths are steep, rocky, and demanding. You, a Roman lady, likely accustomed to a certain level of comfort, now find yourself engaged in a strenuous physical exertion, driven by your piety. You are not alone. You are guided and supported by the local monksmen, whose lives are dedicated to prayer and asceticism in this holy wilderness. They know every path, every rock, every sacred spot on the mountain. Climbing Mount Sinai, even with assistance, is not for the faint of knee or the easily winded. You're pretty sure some of those beatific visions reported by later desert saints were actually just altitude-induced hallucinations, liberally mixed with extreme physical exhaustion and a touch of dehydration. But the spiritual Wi-Fi at the summit, as you anticipate, is supposedly second to none. As you climb, the monks point out various sites associated with the Mosaic tradition. A quirky or fringe tidbit from your detailed account, Egeria, is your meticulous recording of these identifications. The monks show you the exact spot where the burning bush was located, around which a church or chapel would have already been established, the precursor to the later St. Catherine's Monastery. They point out the cave where Moses is said to have sheltered for 40 days and nights the spring, from which he drank, the place where the 70 elders waited. Even the supposed site where the golden calf was fashioned and worshipped down in the valley. The sheer precision of these oral traditions passed down through generations of desert ascetics is remarkable, even if one might occasionally suspect a touch of enthusiastic local embellishment. The desert monks bless their devout and incredibly leathery hides might point to a completely unremarkable patch of sand and declare with unwavering conviction, "And this dear venerable sister is the very spot where Aaron misplaced his favorite sandals for precisely 3 hours and 17 minutes during the construction of the tabernacle." You would, of course, nod with deep reverence, making a careful mental note for your sisters profoundly moved by this crucial, hitherto unrecorded piece of sacred history. One does not, after all, question the provenance of misplaced holy footwear when guided by such piety. Reaching the summit or the specific holy places on the mountain is an experience of profound spiritual intensity. Here on this windswept peak, you pray, you participate in services led by the monks. You read the relevant passages from Exodus, feeling an almost overwhelming connection to those ancient events. You are standing where Moses stood, in a place where the veil between heaven and earth feels incredibly thin. A mainstream historical fact is that Mount Sinai was already an important Christian pilgrimage destination by the 4th century, with well-established monastic communities, both Aramitic and Coenobitic, and recognized holy sites. Egeria's detailed account provides invaluable confirmation of these early traditions and the fervent piety associated with the mountain. You spend time with these desert monks, marveling at their austerity, their unwavering faith, their profound knowledge of the scriptures, and their ability to find spiritual sustenance in such a harsh and unforgiving environment. They are the living embodiment of a radical Christian devotion, and their example clearly moves you deeply. Your journey to Sinai, Egeria is more than just a visit to another set of holy places. It's an immersion into the very landscape of the Old Testament, a challenging physical and spiritual ascent, and a profound encounter with the ascetic heart of early Christian monasticism. The echoes of Moses, the fire of the law, and the silence of the desert will resonate within you long after you begin your descent from that holy mountain. Section 11. The sacred majesty of Mount Sinai with its echoes of Moses and the thundering voice of God has left you spiritually exhilarated and perhaps physically rather weary, Egeria. You have prayed on its summit, explored its holy caves, and shared in the devotions of the resident monks. But your journey through these ancient arid lands is not yet complete. The deserts of Sinai, and indeed the neighboring deserts of Egypt, like Nitria, Kelia, and Sardis, are not just empty wildernesses. They are in this late 4th century teeming with a different kind of life. The remarkable, austere, and deeply influential communities of Christian ascetics, the Desert Fathers and Mothers. And you, with your insatiable spiritual curiosity, are determined to seek them out to witness their extraordinary way of life and to glean wisdom from their profound simplicity. A mainstream historical fact is that the deserts of Egypt and the Sinai Peninsula were the very crucible of Christian monasticism starting in the late 3rd and flourishing throughout the 4th century. Inspired by figures like Saint Anthony the Great, who famously retreated into the deep desert to battle demons and pursue a life of solitary prayer, thousands of men and women renounced the world, its comforts, and its distractions to seek God in the starkness and silence of these barren lands. Your journey, Egeria, takes you directly into the heart of this burgeoning spiritual movement. As you travel, you actively seek out these holy men, and sometimes women, the Ammas or desert mothers. In their remote cells, their tiny hermitages, often little more than crude stone huts or natural caves scattered across the desolate landscape. Finding them can be an adventure in itself, requiring knowledgeable guides and a willingness to venture far from established routes. These are not people who advertise their presence. They have chosen solitude. Yet they are often surprisingly hospitable to sincere pilgrims like yourself, seeing it as a Christian duty to offer what little they have. The appearance and lifestyle of these desert ascetics are a study in radical simplicity and self-denial. Imagine encountering a man who has spent decades in the desert. His skin is weathered and sun-baked to the color of old leather. His frame often gaunt from fasting his clothing, usually just a single rough-spun tunic, perhaps made of palm fibers or animal skin. The height of desert ascetic fashion seems to be one slightly scratchy all-purpose tunic worn with deep spiritual conviction and an incredibly impressive wind-whipped tan. You briefly consider adopting the look for its sheer practicality, then remember your inherent preference for slightly more thread count in your garments and significantly fewer scorpions in your immediate vicinity. Their cells are bare, containing perhaps a mat to sleep on, a water jar, a few simple tools for manual labor, and most preciously, a copy of the Psalms or some other portion of Scripture. Their diet is astonishingly meager. You note in your letter, Egeria, that many of them subsist on a little bread, a few dates, or wild herbs and water, often brackish and unsatisfying, and that only after sunset following a day of fasting. The monks' daily menu appears to be water, more water, a handful of wild desert greens, if it's a particularly festive occasion, and a side order of profound spiritual contemplation and perhaps a light wrestling match with a demon or two. Your own idea of a meager pilgrim meal back on the Roman road suddenly feels like a 7-course imperial banquet by comparison. Despite their extreme austerity, the overwhelming impression you gain from these encounters is not one of misery or deprivation, but of a profound, unshakable inner peace, a deep spiritual joy, and often a surprising warmth and gentle wisdom. You describe sitting with them, conversing often through translators, as many would speak Coptic or Syriac, rather than the Greek or Latin you are more familiar with, and asking them for a word, a piece of spiritual counsel. Their advice is usually simple, practical, and deeply insightful, often drawn from their own hard-won experience in the spiritual struggle. You might ask a venerable ancient hermit, whose eyes seem to have seen eternity, and also probably a very great deal of sand over the decades, for the secret to a holy life. He might look at you with a gentle, almost amused smile and advise you simply to pray more often. Be patient with your own failings and try not to complain too much about the scorpions. Solid advice, really applicable in many situations, both ancient and modern. You encounter different forms of monastic life. There are the true hermits, the eremites living in complete solitude, their cells sometimes miles apart from any other human being. And then there are the coenobitic communities, where monks live together under a common rule, sharing work, prayer, and meals, such as they are often gathered around a respected elder or Abba Father. You visit both, observing their different rhythms of life, but always noting the common threads of prayer scripture. Recitation, often memorized as books, were rare and precious manual labor, such as weaving mats or baskets, both to sustain themselves and to keep idleness at bay and rigorous fasting. A quirky or fringe tidbit that emerges from the lore of the Desert Fathers are the tales of their extraordinary, almost superhuman ascetic feats. Stories abound of monks who stood in prayer for days on end without sleep, who ate only a few figs a week, who exposed themselves to the extremes of desert heat and cold, or who even lived in dried-up wells or in later Syrian traditions on top of pillars, the stylites. While you, Egeria, primarily describe the more everyday, extraordinary asceticism of the monks you meet, their intense fasting, their constant prayer, you are clearly deeply impressed by their spiritual athleticism and their unwavering commitment. The extent to which the reported sayings, apophthegmata of the Desert Fathers and Mothers accurately reflect their precise historical teachings versus later elaborations, compilations, or even idealizations by their disciples and subsequent hagiographers is a continuous area of study and discussion for patristic scholars and historians of early Christian spirituality. However, the core message of detachment from worldly concerns, cultivation of inner stillness, Hezekiah, constant prayer, and profound humility shines through in the accounts that have survived, including your own valuable eyewitness testimony. Your encounters with these desert saints are a powerful counterpoint to the imperial splendor of Constantinople and the elaborate public liturgies of Jerusalem. Here, in the silence and starkness of the desert, you witness a different kind of Christian devotion. Intensely personal, radically simple, and focused on the inner transformation of the soul. The wisdom you glean from these encounters, the example of their lives lived in utter reliance on God, becomes another precious thread woven into the rich tapestry of your pilgrimage, a treasure you will carry back to share with your sisters in the West. The desert has taught you that true spiritual riches are not always found in grand cathedrals or golden relics, but sometimes in the quiet heart of a humble monk in a sun-baked, windswept cell. The profound spiritual encounters in the stark wilderness of Sinai, communing with those remarkably austere Desert Fathers and Mothers, have added yet another layer of depth to your already extraordinary pilgrimage, Egeria. Their wisdom born of silence and sacrifice echoes in your thoughts as you prepare for the next phase of your journey. Your insatiable desire to connect with the very soil and stones of biblical history now draws you towards Egypt proper, specifically to the fertile lands of the eastern Nile Delta, the region traditionally identified as the land of Goshen, where the Israelites sojourned before their dramatic exodus. So you arrive in Egypt, the land of ancient pharaohs' colossal pyramids, and that truly enormous river, the Nile. But are you primarily there for the classic tourist snaps in front of the Sphinx, or a leisurely cruise down the aforementioned massive waterway? Oh no, Egeria. While the monumental vestiges of Egypt's pagan past are undeniably all around you, your devout focus remains firmly fixed on the Old Testament narrative. You're on a sacred mission to find the exact spot in Goshen where Joseph's brothers had that rather awkward but ultimately pivotal family reunion, and the places where the Israelites toiled under Pharaoh. Priorities, after all, are priorities. A mainstream historical fact is that the eastern Nile Delta region of Egypt, traditionally identified with the biblical land of Goshen, was indeed a fertile and strategically important area in ancient times. By the 4th century AD, it boasted a significant Christian population, numerous churches, and thriving monastic communities, many of whom were Coptic-speaking descendants of the ancient Egyptians. Pilgrims like yourself, Egeria, were eager to visit sites in this region, connected with the Old Testament stories of the Israelite sojourn and their subsequent departure. As you travel from the arid Sinai Peninsula into the fringes of the Delta, the landscape undergoes a dramatic transformation. The barren rock and sand give way to a network of canals, irrigated fields teeming with crops, and bustling villages. The life-giving waters of the Nile create an oasis of fertility, a stark contrast to the desert you've just traversed. The air is heavier here, more humid, filled with the sounds of agriculture, the cries of water birds, and the murmur of daily life in a densely populated region. You might travel by land along canal banks, or perhaps even by boat, for some stretches navigating the intricate waterways of the delta. The Nile itself is big. Really astonishingly big. Makes that charming little stream back in your Galatian hometown look like a temporarily inconvenient garden puddle big. You're probably quite tempted to just commission a small papyrus raft and enjoy a brief, leisurely float, perhaps with a cool drink and a wide-brimmed hat. But there are Old Testament brick-making cities to find, and your spiritual itinerary is nothing if not demanding. Your primary goal in this region is to identify and visit the cities of Pithom and Ramesses, which the book of Exodus famously states the Israelites were forced to build for Pharaoh. The precise locations of the biblical cities of Pithom and Ramesses, which Egeria diligently sought in the land of Goshen, are still matters of extensive archaeological investigation and considerable scholarly debate even today. With various sites in the eastern Nile Delta, such as Tel El Maskuta and Kontir, having been proposed over the years based on textual and archaeological evidence. In your time Egeria, you rely on the guidance of local Christian monks and clergy who have their own established traditions and identifications for these sacred locations. Imagine yourself arriving at a place pointed out by your devout local guides, as for example the ancient city of Pithom. It might be a collection of mounds, crumbling mud brick ruins, or perhaps an area still bearing evidence of ancient storehouses or fortifications. Your guide, a venerable Egyptian monk with eyes that have seen countless Nile floods and pilgrim seasons, might point with absolute unwavering certainty to a slightly muddy, unassuming field. And behold, venerable sister, he'd declare, this is the very ground where our Israelite ancestors stored their straw for the bricks, and where the taskmaster's whips did cruelly fall. You would of course nod with deep reverence, profoundly impressed by his historical precision and trying very hard not to imagine the sheer quantity of 4th century Nile mud currently attaching itself to your sturdy pilgrim sandals. You are meticulous in your explorations. You describe in your letter how you are taken to see these sites, how the local holy men read the relevant passages from Exodus on the very spots making the ancient narrative come alive. You are shown what are believed to be the remains of the store cities, the granaries, and perhaps even places associated with Moses' early life. Your keen interest isn't just in seeing, it's in understanding and connecting the physical place with the scriptural account and feeling the weight of that sacred history. During your travels through Goshen and the land of Arabia, as this eastern border region of Egypt was sometimes called, in Roman times, you continue to interact with the local Christian communities. You observe their distinct Coptic traditions, their liturgical practices, which might differ in some nuances from what you've seen in Jerusalem or Constantinople. You meet with bishops, priests, and more of those remarkable desert monks and nuns whose piety and asceticism continue to inspire you deeply. A quirky or fringe tidbit that often comes through in your narrative, Egeria, is your wonderful blend of sincere piety and a remarkably practical, almost journalistic eye for detail. You might sometimes express a polite, subtle skepticism, or note a slight discrepancy if a local tradition seems a bit too fanciful, or a site identification particularly tenuous. You often recount asking your guides, "And is this truly the place mentioned in the scriptures? Can you show me the passage?" Yet you almost always defer respectfully to the wisdom and traditions of the local holy men, especially the monks whom you hold in the highest esteem. It's a charming balance. You want to believe you are there to believe, but your intelligent mind also wants to understand and verify as much as possible. The holy monks say this is the exact spot where the bitter waters of Mara were made sweet. You might carefully record giving due credit to your source, while perhaps leaving a tiny, unspoken space for the mysteries of faith and the complexities of ancient site preservation. Your journey through the land of Goshen is another profound immersion into the world of the Old Testament, complementing your experiences in Sinai. You are tracing the story of God's people from their sojourn in a foreign land to their miraculous deliverance. Each ruin visited, each story heard, each prayer offered. In these ancient places adds to the spiritual treasure you are accumulating. a treasure you will so faithfully share with your sisters upon your eventual still distant return. The Nile has witnessed millennia of history, and you, Egeria, are now a small but significant part of its ongoing sacred narrative. Your journey through the land of Goshen and the eastern fringes of Egypt, Egeria tracing the footsteps of the Israelites, and marveling at the deep roots of Coptic Christianity has been yet another profound spiritual immersion. You've conversed with desert monks whose austerity made even their Sinai brethren look like flamboyant party animals, and you've prayed at sites resonating with Old Testament history. Just when one might think, Egeria, that you, a respectable Roman lady from the far west, might finally be ready for a nice, quiet cup of herbal tea, a long nap that lasts for, say, a full week, and perhaps a leisurely sea voyage back towards slightly more familiar territory. Your indomitable pilgrim spirit pipes up with, "You know what lies even further east of here, Mesopotamia? I hear they have some truly excellent ancient letters from Jesus himself and the tomb of an apostle." Your dedication to collecting spiritual air miles and your ability to endure yet another long, dusty, and potentially perilous overland trek are truly astounding. And so driven by this unquenchable thirst for sacred history and direct encounters with the relics and traditions of early Christianity, you set your sights on a remarkable detour, the ancient city of Edessa in the Roman province of Osroene on the edge of Mesopotamia, modern Şanlıurfa in Turkey. This is a significant undertaking requiring you to travel eastward from Syria, perhaps from Antioch crossing, or journeying near the great Euphrates River into a region that feels even more remote. A frontier zone where Roman and Persian influences sometimes uneasily met. The landscape here might be drier, more open plains stretching towards the vast Mesopotamian basin. The air carrying the scent of different herbs, the light having a different quality. The logistical challenges of travel, finding safe lodging, reliable water sources, and trustworthy guides, remain ever present, perhaps even amplified in these borderland territories. But Edessa holds a particular allure for devout Christians of your era. A mainstream historical fact is that Edessa was a hugely significant early center of Syriac Christianity, priding itself on an ancient, almost apostolic Christian heritage. It was a vibrant hub of Syriac language literature and theological thought developing traditions, distinct from, though, in conversation with the Greek-speaking churches of Antioch and Alexandria. Great Christian thinkers and writers like Bardaisan Tatian, compiler of the Diatessaron Gospel Harmony, and the revered poet-theologian Ephraim the Syrian were all associated with Edessa, making it a beacon of Semitic Christianity. The city's most potent claim to fame, and undoubtedly a primary magnet for your visit, Egeria, is the remarkable legend of King Abgar Fav Ukama. According to this widely circulated and deeply cherished tradition, Abgar, the first-century ruler of Edessa, suffered from an incurable disease, possibly leprosy. Having heard of Jesus' miraculous healings, he supposedly sent a letter to Christ inviting him to Edessa, acknowledging his divine power and offering him refuge. Jesus, according to the legend, replied with a letter of his own blessing. Abgar, and promising that after his ascension, he would send a disciple to heal the king and preach the gospel in Edessa. This disciple was later identified as Thaddeus or Addai, one of the 72. The historical authenticity of the Abgar-Jesus correspondence and the associated legends of Edessa's early Christianization has been extensively debated by scholars for centuries, with most modern historians viewing the letters as pious and skillfully crafted 3rd or perhaps early 4th century compositions designed to bolster Edessa's claim to apostolic antiquity and its status as one of the first Christian kingdoms. Regardless of its precise historical origins, once the story was immensely powerful and widely believed in your time, Egeria. So you arrive in Edessa, a city with a unique atmosphere, a blend of Roman civic structure, deeply rooted Syriac culture, and perhaps subtle influences from the nearby Persian frontier. You would see its defensive walls, its citadel perhaps, its famous sacred pools. Associated with Abraham. The pools of Abraham, or Balıklıgöl, are still a major feature of Şanlıurfa today, though their 4th century Christian significance might have been different or developing. Your first priority, of course, is to seek out the Christian authorities, the Bishop of Edessa. Presenting your well-traveled letters of introduction, you are as usual received with honor and hospitality, and you make your most pressing request to see the famed letter of Jesus to King Abgar. Imagine the scene, Egeria. you are taken with great reverence by the bishop and his clergy to the cathedral or a special archive where this precious relic is kept. They bring out the ancient parchment or papyrus, perhaps encased in a jeweled reliquary. You are looking at what you firmly believe to be the actual physical handwriting, or at least an authenticated direct copy of a letter from Jesus Christ himself. That's like stumbling upon a divinely autographed original manuscript of the Sermon on the Mount, casually tucked away in your great-aunt's attic back in Galicia. You're probably trying to maintain your dignified Roman composure while simultaneously checking for a celestial watermark, verifying the authenticity of the divine ink, and trying not to squeal like an overly enthusiastic fangirl at a pop concert, if such things existed. You describe how the bishop reads both Abgar's letter and Jesus' reply to you, and how you are given copies to take away. An immense treasure for your sisters. A quirky or fringe tidbit connected to this legend, though it becomes much more prominent in later centuries, is the story of the image of Edessa, or the Mandalion. This was a cloth supposedly bearing a miraculous acharapoieton, not made by human hands. Image of Christ's face, sometimes linked to the Abgar story as being sent by Jesus to the king. While the fully developed Mandalion legend and the physical relic itself gain prominence, later stories of a sacred, divinely created image of Christ associated with Edessa might well have been circulating in some form during your visit, adding to the city's aura of unique sanctity. You, however, focus primarily on the letters in your account. Your explorations in Edessa are not limited to the Abgar correspondence. The city is rich in other Christian traditions. You visit numerous churches and martyria shrines of martyrs. You are particularly keen to visit the traditional tomb of St. Thomas the Apostle. Local Edessan tradition held that the relics, or at least a significant portion of them of the Apostle Thomas, who famously journeyed to India, had been brought back and interred in their city, making it a major apostolic shrine. You attend services observing the distinct Syriac liturgical rites, listening to hymns sung in that ancient Semitic language, a linguistic cousin of the Aramaic spoken by Jesus himself. The monks in Edessa are explaining their ancient Syriac theological traditions, and it's all wonderfully devout, deeply historical, and just a little bit different from the Greek-dominated services you've experienced elsewhere. You're nodding along trying to keep your Bardaisan straight from your Tatian, and sincerely hoping there isn't going to be a pop quiz on the finer points of early Syriac Christology later that evening. Your Mesopotamian quest to Edessa is a testament to your tireless pursuit of every thread of Christian history and tradition. It shows your willingness to venture far off the more beaten pilgrim paths to explore the diverse expressions of your faith across the Roman world and its frontiers. The relics and stories of Edessa, particularly the Abgar letters, add another precious jewel to the collection of spiritual experiences you are gathering. Tangible links to the very dawn of Christianity, all to be shared with those devoted sisters awaiting your return. Your incredible Mesopotamian quest to the ancient city of Edessa, Egeria, has been a profound success. You've prayed at its venerable shrines, marveled at its unique Syriac Christian traditions, and even held copies of the legendary correspondence between King Abgar and Jesus Christ himself. A truly singular experience. After basically collecting enough holy site, been there, done that spiritual merit badges to fill a very large and impressively well-traveled pilgrim sash, you finally decide, perhaps with a sigh that is equal parts contentment and weariness, that it might be time to start pointing your remarkably resilient sandals generally westwards. It has been nearly 3 years since you first set out from your distant home, and the sisters to whom you are writing your detailed account are probably starting to think you've eloped with a particularly devout desert hermit, or perhaps decided to become a permanent, if slightly out-of-place fixture in the Patriarchate of Antioch. The decision to begin the return journey is a significant one. You are deep in the eastern frontiers of the Roman world. Constantinople, your first major staging post on the way back to the west, is many hundreds of arduous miles away, back across the plains of Syria and through the rugged heart of Anatolia. This isn't going to be a quick hop on the imperial equivalent of a red-eye flight. A mainstream historical fact is that Egeria's return journey from the easternmost parts of her pilgrimage, such as Edessa, back towards Constantinople, was itself a lengthy and significant undertaking. It wasn't simply a case of retracing her steps as quickly as possible. She continued to visit Christian communities, seek out holy sites, and meticulously document her observations, still very much in pilgrim mode. So you bid farewell to the bishop and the devout Christians of Edessa. Your saddlebag's now a little heavier with those precious copies of the Abgar letters and countless other memories. As you travel west, you might retrace some of the routes you took on your outward journey, or perhaps you choose slightly different paths to explore new regions or visit communities you missed earlier. Your incredible letter, even in its surviving form, details some of these return travels, showcasing your unflagging curiosity and devotion. The pilgrimage mindset, once adopted, doesn't just switch off like a suddenly extinguished lamp. It becomes a way of seeing and experiencing the world. You are now a seasoned traveler Egeria. The initial apprehensions and uncertainties of those first few months on the road are long gone, replaced by a quiet confidence in your ability to navigate the challenges of ancient travel. A deep trust in divine providence and an almost encyclopedic knowledge of Roman road conditions and the varying quality of monastic hospitality across 3 provinces. Your travel diary. The basis for your letter is now so thick with detailed observations, transcriptions of hymns, summaries of bishops' sermons, and vivid descriptions of church architecture, it probably weighs more than your spare tunic and your entire collection of blessed eulogia combined. You're going to need a dedicated pack mule just for your notes if you keep this up, much to the amusement of any fellow travelers. As you journey, you carry with you not just physical mementos, those small sacred eulogii like oil from lamps at holy shrines or dust from sacred caves, but an immense cargo of spiritual experiences. You have walked where Jesus walked, prayed where the prophets prayed, stood on the mountain where Moses received the law, and conversed with men and women whose lives were monuments of ascetic devotion. These memories, these encounters have profoundly shaped you. You are returning not just as a pilgrim who has seen many things, but as someone transformed by the journey itself. The exact chronology and duration of Egeria's various side trips and her return journey from Edessa to Constantinople are subject to ongoing scholarly interpretation, as her narrative sometimes prioritizes thematic or geographical groupings of sites or the detailed description of liturgical practices over a strict day-by-day chronological sequencing, making the precise timeline a fascinating puzzle for historians. But the general sweep of your westward movement is clear. You pass back through Syria, perhaps revisiting Antioch or other key cities. Then it's the long, demanding traverse of Asia Minor once more. Maybe the mountains seem a little less daunting this time, or perhaps your legs are just more accustomed to the relentless climbing. Even on this homeward stretch, your pilgrim's curiosity remains active. You make a point of visiting Isauria, a rugged region in southern Anatolia, specifically to pray at the shrine of Saint Thecla at Seleucia, modern Silifke. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that Saint Thecla was a hugely popular early Christian female saint, a legendary companion and convert of the Apostle Paul, whose story full of dramatic escapes and unwavering faith resonated deeply, especially with Christian women. Her shrine at Seleucia was a major pilgrimage destination in its own right, with a large monastic community including many female ascetics. Your visit there, Egeria, highlights your interest in the cult of female saints and your solidarity with other devout women. You describe the impressive church and the many cells of the Apotectites ascetics in the surrounding hills, even when you're supposedly heading home, Egeria. Every time you hear about a slightly out-of-the-way shrine dedicated to a particularly inspiring, if perhaps somewhat obscure saint, you're like, ooh, just a small detour, it's practically on the way. Your personal definition of on the way, it must be said, seems to generously encompass several additional provinces and perhaps a minor mountain range or two. The Roman world continues its daily life around you. You encounter imperial officials on their duties, cohorts of soldiers marching to new postings, merchants with their caravans of goods, and of course, other pilgrims, some heading east with the same hopeful anticipation. You once had others like yourself now wending their way westward, their spiritual quests fulfilled. You exchange news, share stories, and offer encouragement. There's a sense in your writing, even as you detail this return journey, that your insatiable desire to see and learn is not entirely quenched. While the main objectives of your grand pilgrimage have been met, one gets the feeling that if a particularly interesting opportunity to visit another holy site or meet another renowned ascetic were to present itself, you would seize it with characteristic enthusiasm. The longing for home for your sisters is undoubtedly growing, but so too is the ingrained habit of the pilgrim, always seeking, always observing, always praying. Constantinople, the great Christian capital of the East, is once again your goal. The gateway back to the Western world, but the journey itself, even in reverse, remains a sacred act. Your long and winding return journey from the eastern frontiers is well underway, Egeria. You're heading back towards Constantinople, that great imperial hub, carrying with you an extraordinary cargo of memories, spiritual insights, and a collection of carefully gathered eulogiae, those blessed tokens from countless holy sites. But perhaps the most precious thing you are carrying, at least for future generations, is the meticulous account of your travels that you are painstakingly compiling. This isn't just a few hasty notes jotted down at the end of a tiring day. This is a detailed, vivid, and deeply personal letter addressed to your Domine et Sororia, your revered ladies and sisters, your spiritual community back in the distant West. You're basically writing the mother of all, wish you were here and let me tell you exactly what you're missing letters. Except instead of breezy updates about the local weather or the quality of the seaside inns, it's more like, today we climbed another profoundly sacred mountain where a prophet definitely stood conversed with a hermit who subsists entirely on 3 wild caper berries and divine grace a day, and then attended a rather moving 9-hour vigil. My sandals send their deepest condolences from beyond the point of all earthly repair. Imagine yourself, Egeria, finding moments amidst the rigors of travel, or during your stays in various cities and monasteries, to sit down with your writing materials. This would likely be a roll of papyrus, or perhaps more durably for such an extensive work. A parchment codex, a bound book of leaves. You'd have your ink probably made from soot or oak galls, and your reed pen or calamus. Writing such a lengthy and detailed account by hand, often in conditions that were far from ideal, a flickering oil lamp in a pilgrim hostel, a quiet corner of a monastery library, or even propped up against your saddlebags by a roadside campfire, would have been a significant undertaking in itself. Your language is the vulgar Latin of your time, the everyday spoken Latin of the late Roman Empire rather than the high classical style of Cicero or Virgil, which gives your narrative a wonderful directness, an unpretentious vivacity, and a feeling of immediacy. The purpose of your letter is clear. You want to share the spiritual fruits of your pilgrimage with your sisters to allow them, through your eyes and your words, to vicariously experience the holiness of these distant lands. You describe the geography of the holy sites, the layout of the churches, the specific details of the liturgies, the hymns sung, the prayers offered, the sermons preached by venerable bishops. You recount your conversations with monks and hermits, sharing the spiritual wisdom they imparted. You note your own emotional and spiritual reactions, your tears of joy upon reaching Jerusalem, your awe at the sight of the burning bush, your deep engagement with the Easter celebrations. It's a rich tapestry of observation, devotion, and personal reflection. Now, for one of the most remarkable parts of your story, Egeria, we must fast forward far beyond your own lifetime. After you completed your journey, returned home, as we presume you did. Though the end of your letter is lost and shared, your incredible account with your sisters. Your manuscript or copies of it clearly circulated and was valued. We know this because in the 7th century, a monk from the Bierzo region of Spain named Valerius wrote a letter praising a certain most blessed virgin Etheria, or Egeria. The spelling varied for her extraordinary pilgrimage to the East and her written account of it. He even summarized some of its contents. But then for over 1,000 years, your voice, Egeria, falls silent. Your detailed travelogue? This unique first-hand testimony from a 4th century female pilgrim largely disappears from the historical record. It's one of those tantalizing lost texts that scholars dream of finding. For over a millennium, your incredible, vividly detailed travel diary was just chilling out in various monastic libraries, probably being occasionally dusted off by a succession of monks who had absolutely no idea they were handling the 4th century's most intrepid and articulate lady traveler's secret memoirs. Talk about a very, very long nap in the archives. Then in 1884 comes a moment of pure scholarly serendipity. A mainstream historical fact is that your travel narrative, Egeria, was dramatically rediscovered in that year by an Italian scholar named Gianfrancesco Gammarini. He found it not as a standalone, clearly labeled work, but as part of an 11th century manuscript, a codex that had originated in the great monastery of Monte Cassino and eventually found its way to the library of the Confraternita dei Laici in Arezzo, Italy. This manuscript was a compilation of various texts. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that your amazing journey, this priceless eyewitness account, was bound together with other completely unrelated works, including a treatise on the mysteries by Saint Hilary of Poitiers and some Latin hymns. It was untitled and anonymous within this larger volume, patiently waiting for centuries to be recognized for what it was. It's the historical equivalent of finding a lost play by Shakespeare tucked away as an appendix in an old, forgotten tax ledger. Imagine Gammarini in that quiet Arezzo library, carefully turning the ancient parchment pages and suddenly realizing he's reading something extraordinary, a vivid, personal, and incredibly detailed account of a journey to the Holy Land written in a distinctive late Latin style, clearly by an educated woman describing places and liturgical practices from a very early period of Christianity. He probably needed a very strong Italian espresso, a quiet moment to collect his thoughts, and perhaps a brief silent consultation with the muses of history to confirm he hadn't accidentally stumbled through a wrinkle in time. The scholarly world was electrified by the discovery. Here was a voice from the distant past, a female voice no less, offering unparalleled insights into early Christian pilgrimage, the geography of the Holy Land as it was understood in the 4th century, the daily life of monks and ascetics, and most importantly, the rich and evolving liturgical practices of the Jerusalem Church. The manuscript was unfortunately incomplete, missing its beginning, which would have contained your name, Egeria, and details of your departure from the West, and also its end, which would have described your final return journey and your ultimate reflections. The precise extent of these missing portions of Egeria's letter, particularly how much of her initial journey from the West and her final thoughts upon completing such an epic undertaking, are lost to us, remains a tantalizing and somewhat frustrating question for scholars, who can only speculate on the full original scope of her narrative based on the substantial surviving text and Valerius's earlier though brief summary. It was through painstaking scholarly work comparing the content of the rediscovered text with Valerius of Bierzo's 7th century description of the pilgrimage of Egeria or Egeria that your identity was reestablished. Your lost voice, after more than a millennium of silence, was finally heard again, ready to transport new generations of readers back to the sacred landscapes and fervent faith of the late Roman world. Your personal letter, intended for a small circle of sisters, had become an invaluable treasure for all of history.